Hello, welcome to the Self Learning Platform by Dr. Sushma Singh. Today we start Unit 4, Saint Augustine and Saint Thomas Aquinas. And our topic is Augustine's influence. Augustine contended that a person's true end was beyond history. Human history could be understood as consisting of good and bad events, the ultimate meaning of which was unfathomable to human beings, but grasped by God. Beyond the outward flux was the hidden historical drama of sin and redemption, which only time could resolve in due course. No earthly state, as a result, could eternally guarantee security from internal and external attack. The classical political traditions of Greece and Rome were wrong and egoistical in contending that human fulfillment came with citizenship in a rational and just state. This could not be attained. Augustine believed that God ordained government, even though human history narrated a list of destructive wars. The classical traditions believe in the rationality of human beings and in his capacity for rational and just government was naive. Because of Adam's sin, the human being was forever a victim of irrational self love and of lack of self knowledge and self control. Government was instituted with divine authorization for preservation of relative world peace and not as a means of human fulfillment. Governments could exist without justice, but that would mean that they were large scale bands of thieves seeking peace through arbitrary domination and force. A good Christian state ought to be just. Augustine did not advocate the establishment of a theocracy in the world. Instead, he described the sanctified role of the priest, playing a critical role in good government to remedy the corrupt nature of human beings, a corruption belying any hope for rational self improvement. Augustine argued that the whole human race after Adam's sin could not escape its consequences and were incapable of any act of pure good. Although human beings were naturally social, they could still choose wrongly, and if they chose well, it was because of divine grace and help. Strict justice could condemn most persons to hell. Believing in faith and in God's mercy, Augustine interpreted the Bible as denoting that God had chosen a small number of souls for salvation through an unfathomable decree of predestination superior to any merit or act historical persons might perform. Augustine developed his theory of grace in course of a debate with the British monk Pelagius. He held that God knew about Adam's sin, Moral evil in the world was a result of a conscious decision to abuse free will. However, human history and society would always contain ungovernable elements of conceit and desire that made governments, even tyrannical governments, necessary. It was with divine grace that governments were instituted in order to ensure civil peace and order. In interpreting Cicero's republican theory of government, Augustine contended that a just commonwealth consisted of a rational multitude united by a common love of God rather than a common love of material well being of the social order. Cicero's Rome brought together people for material reasons rather than spiritual ones. For Augustine, a true state was a true church. Augustine contended that a secular state was a moral entity and that states could choose to do what are morally right as well as what was morally wrong. The Christians desirous of a secular state ought to assume responsibility for maintenance of civil peace. They have duties towards the state and assume public responsibilities, including the need to fight a just war. A just war had to be fought in order to secure a just state. Since no earthly state was entirely just, it was not possible to realize a Christian utopia in history. Christianity, while affirming equality among human beings, loathed the female body and looked upon the ideal woman as one who is chaste, modest, silent, and obedient. The early Christian text insisted that all persons, father, husband, mother, wife, children, and finally slaves, were to be maintained in a fixed hierarchical social order, all subordinated to each other, and finally all were to be subject in fear to God the Father and Lord Dominus, meaning slave owner, as his children and slaves. Within the church, women not only occupied separate place from those of men and were also ranked depending whether they were martyrs, virgins, widows, or young girls. Gradually, they were made to wear a veil as a symbol of submission to the head of the household and God the Father. All these measures had one aim, a purposefully imposed inconspicuousness and silence. Christianity placed tremendous importance on virginity and was hostile to remarriage and divorce. It glorified widowhood. Saint Augustine dismissed the female as inferior for her weaker body, which she would be able to transcend in the universal community, united in one's love for God. In the city of God, he divided human beings into two communities, one focusing on woman and the other on God. Like Cicero's, he defined the civitas as a group of men joined in their agreement about the meaning of is right. while Cicero looked at the Republic of Rome as the expression of its. For Augustine, a community was unified by love of God or civitas Dei, or the love of self, civitas hominis. Both the civitates were by citizens. In the city of men, the individuals were concerned with this world. It was one of deceit, ambition, and vice, and one of slavery, hierarchy, and repression. In the city of God, the individuals were concerned with their love for God, and they aspired for complete happiness. There was no need for political institutions, for there was no inequality and hierarchy. It was here that the female could become a part of a community, for when oriented towards God, she became an equal to the male. When identified with the body, the female reflected carnality and was considered as sin. Augustine emphasized virginity and chastity in sexual matters. He debarred widows from remarrying. In marriage, one succumbed to the temptations of one's soul and was distracted from the love of God. Ideally, marriage ought to be based on continence. In the city of God, when the soul found its spiritual meaning, the female had no functions within the households. Augustine's theory helped subsequent ages to develop a doctrine of the Church as a perfect society with powers necessary to any self sufficient community regarding property and governance, implying in principle that it was not possible to attain salvation outside the Church. Augustine roused support for the idea of papal monarchy during the medieval times. Although he did not subscribe to the idea of two distinct demarcated spheres, civil and ecclesiastical, yet his theory was used to justify a two swords theory of world rule, spiritual and temporal, pope and emperor. He did not support the idea that the state ought to be subordinate to the church, for he viewed the state as a distinct institution. It was not a secular wing of the church, though the church could advise it. Theorists of the medieval age developed these arguments into a theory and practice of a theoretical state, controlling law for spiritual ends. Augustine's ideal corresponded with Plato's ideal of justice as outlined in the Republic. Here we want to wind up this lecture. Thank you so much for your attention.